Okay, so anyway, guys, that's the gist of what I'm trying to communicate there. My dad, he's like phoning me now, and so I got to go see what he's up to. But yeah, that's basically, you know, America needs to direct its foreign policy to China. So all of the major conflicts America is engaged in today, and even the future, like where it wants to end up, is all at the Chinese table. You understand? So it's like China has number one in 59 out of 64 high tech areas. Hey, we want some of that technology to apply it to our cities so that then we're, in a better state of being. So we have to keep the relationship open with China. China has 1.5 billion people. China has a lot of money. They're going to have a lot of money. And we're going to need money, North America. We're not going to have the top products. We don't have, we're not going to be able to sustain we're not going to be able to produce the things that we all want to consume. So we're going to have to maintain an import relationship with China. So, but you're talking about now this war with Russia and Ukraine. With China, America, Russia, and China, China can sign a big nuclear agreement that would be like, it's like a new start agreement where they reduce all the nuclear stockpiles collectively. You can include India, Pakistan, Israel. Basically all the nuclear weapons are going to be put under a global nuclear treaty. And ideally, you get one organization that's overseen by all the nations to guard the nuclear weapons. Basically, you have one global army where over time you can imagine that the world wants to consolidate into a global army, that we have one army protecting all people, that you're going to have a global government. You want to have a federal government, the equivalent of in a nation when you have a federal government, except it's going to happen at the global level. So now you'll have a global government that's making sure that there's a base level socialism for the entire population of the world. So if you're in a shitty situation in any country, global government can move you to any other place that has means to do so and get you a reasonable situation. So this is just natural if you think about it, like the human species wants to conserve energy. It's not something that's planned. It's just something that eventually evolves. So, anyway, guys, thank you for watching. And that's, the gist of the video is that, there's a lot of trouble in the world, and a lot of the problems that are at the root of people's problems has to do with lack of realizing basic needs. So you can, with a global government and a global socialism, you're basically stabilizing the world in such a way that it's like it's turning an ocean of volatility into like a calm lake of serenity. It's like that's what you're doing when you're ensuring that people have basic income of $100,000 a year, housing, food, healthcare, the basic needs that would satisfy any individual. You're now, you're never gonna experience expected, predictable, probabilistic violence. So it's like anywhere you look where there's like poverty, you're going to have all kinds of thefts and, that kind of thing. There's a correlation between poverty and treating people bad because people are poor and so they're trying to get more resources and so they think they can, so it's like, and it's like, so basically you work out you create that minimum level of prosperity, and so you've basically ensured global peace and tranquility, which is actually what you want. There's this notion that keeping people in this kind of loop of where the ruling class are controlling the mass of the people through means of putting them into constant wars, and then you do imperialism and this kind of violent class violence is actually not productive in the end. Basically, what you want to do is you want to establish a base level socialism so people are happy so they can pursue whatever they want to pursue. So basically, you free up their time. This is the most important thing. A population that has 1.5 billion people, and it can free up those people's time where they don't have to be worried about their basic needs, working for their basic needs. They can spend all their time thinking and applying their time to however they want to apply their time to. So, this is the most beneficial thing for a population that wants to keep growing is ultimately to free up those resources in the economy, which are the people themselves. So if you have, free people that are able to, direct their energies in the way that they feel is the best because they know themselves the best and they know how they can apply themselves most productively, then suddenly you're most likely going to have a much more better society. That's just, to me, that's common sense, is that the notion that you have to keep people at the verge of economic collapse in order to incentivize them to be productive is a weak legitimization of an exploitative system that doesn't actually compete with one that does a better balance. So anyway, guys, this is very interesting times, and I am so excited to see the reinvented North America, which is going to be like, it's going to be reaching into the past when we already had experience with socialism. That's my opinion, is that you're going to see an increased push for socialism. You're going to have the end of this war with Russia. So it's like, this whole Cold War, the whole stench of the Cold War is going to just be out, and you're going to realize what's left over. Oh, the military industrial complex made money, and those rich oligarchs in Ukraine made money, and, Ukraine is bombed out, and, the American arms companies are richer. And, so in my opinion, but this is like, that's, so, that's to me that's what I see as the conclusion of the war in Ukraine, is that this was a big exploitative process where their society was weaponized by the West in order to confront Russia when they were older. So they have this, State Department propaganda in Ukraine telling all the Ukrainians about how evil Russia is. And then they even take these Ukrainian nationalists who are a disgusting force, but they take them and they drape them over the nation as if it's the whole country. And so now you don't feel bad about sending them to the front line because it's just a bunch of Ukrainian Nazis. It's pretty crazy. It's pretty crazy how they were, how this was like a really targeted ploy to kind of like try to knock out Russia. And it wasn't subtle. It was like 30 years. You see this NATO beast encroaching on Russia. And you're like, hold on a second. The Cold War is over and the Soviet Union disbanded and they got rid of the Warsaw Pact. Why is NATO going up to the border with Russia? Why are they pursuing a hostile containment, Balkanization program on Russia? The greed of the resources. It's been like this forever, that England has been wanting to take over Russia. I think it goes back to Brzezinski's plan to encircle Russia in the Black Sea, and and then you're going to be able to like snatch up all its resources because Russia's so rich, in resources. And yeah, it's just it's and then you have the nuclear weapons, and so they're scaring the population into believing that the Russians are a big threat because they have nuclear weapons, that we have to at all costs get up to Russia and make sure that that those nuclear weapons are contained. And so it's like they're making you go through some nuclear game theory, and it's like, oh my God, is there going to be a nuclear war with Russia? So how do we take over all of Russia's nuclear weapons, or what should be done to ensure that no nuclear war would ever happen? So it's like, man, it's the level of indoctrination, or like seeing Russia from a hostile lens, is all colored from I think it's mostly to do, despite the fact there is legitimate fear about nuclear weapons, like you have to give it some amount of credibility that nuclear weapons is a scary thing for people to have to deal with, that people panic, that governments panic, that it's like people are not always the best versions of themselves at either level. So this nuclear issue is a serious thing, and so it's really, I think, one of the root issues of the Ukraine war. So if you're trying to really make peace between Russia and Ukraine, which is probably good because there's already millions of people dead. These people have gone through hell. And let me tell you, man, when they started to put together how they were set up, how much of a rigging of the war happened to put all those young people into the meat grinder for the riches of the oligarchs, and then this snowball's chance of breaking up Russia. I think that you may have consolidation between Ukraine and Russia, and they may want to they're going to start asking for reparations. They're going to get into collective bargaining, and they're going to be like, look, the West was leveraging way too many resources to create way too much damage in our part of the world, even though it was Ukrainians that were ultimately fighting the Russians. This was such a meddling in that local area's politics to achieve an aggressive goal that, we want reparations. So that's, in my opinion, the West shouldn't be stunned if something like that comes up, and that could mean, and if they don't want to pay up, what happens if Russia and Ukraine say, hey, we've got strong armies, we've been fighting each other for a goddamn long amount of time, and look at these assholes over here, what do you think? So, guys, I think the jig is up for Europe. It's time for them to go to the table with China and be like, look, we need to get special import treaties because we need to be able to import your top technology. Our people are going to suffer otherwise. We don't have that much to trade with in the world. We don't have resources. We don't have the top technology anymore. So we need to import stuff at low cost. So how do we make this work? It's like, and then begin a diplomatic process with, and so how would we end the war with Russia and Ukraine? What would that mean in terms of repairing Ukraine? Like, what kind of guarantees could we give their people? What could we rebuild for them? Where could we send their people with passports? That's what I would start like that if I were Europe in their government. Is like, you want to go to the table with China. The future is with China. China, what do we do to make the relationship better? And I don't think that restricting oil from Russia is going to help anything. Um, restricting the purchase of oil from Russia now because Europe is so desperate. Europe needs the oil. Europe needs the natural gas. Europe was used as a, as a little proxy as a little proxy to usher through the U.S. to Ukraine. So you have this U.S. Ukraine portal, and then Europe is pouring some of its money into the same thing, but ultimately, Europe does owe Russia, and Europe does owe Ukraine. Passivity is not an excuse for complicity and damage. So the fact that that this war with Ukraine occurred is a direct result of Western funding of the Maidan coup, weaponizing the Ukrainian society against Russia with the intention of starting a war against Russia. Already warring against the Russians in the east of Ukraine. So there's no way to say it's, if you've been paying attention to what's been going on, there's no way to claim that the West had no role in the Russian tanks rolling over the border into Ukraine. You have to be really not have been paying attention to European politics and what was happening following the collapse of the Soviet Union to understand how Europe was being weaponized into this, compliance arrangement with the U.S. directing the show. So, it's like, and now it's coming home to roost. Now it's seeing that these were, the cost of the Ukraine war is so unbearable. The goals of somehow ending nuclear proliferation into Russia or breaking up Russia and stealing its resources for imperialistic ambitions is fraught and non-realizable. So basically, this has to end in a treaty that consolidates nuclear treaty. You have to have China, Russia, America, India, Israel sign a big nuclear treaty so that you can then exculpate, so that you can then basically bring a little bit of honor to why the Ukrainians were set up and weaponized against the Russians. As where millions of their people are dying. The Ukrainians are just going to be like, oh, the West had nothing to do with the fact that my whole fucking east of the country is destroyed. They're just going to blame all of it on Russia. I don't think you're going to get that. I really don't think you're going to get that once the fog of war has lifted and once they have a chance to think about it. And I think the sooner you can convert their society into a prosperity-based society, a de-weaponized society, you want to get them into a new frame of mind as quick as you can, out of this war scene, and then turn the page. That's really what you want. That part of the world has suffered way too much. This is another calamity, and the Ukrainians, it's unfortunate they were used by their leaders, and America was fully happy to enable that. And so was the collective West, and the Ukrainian people paid for it. And now this, hashtag stand with Ukraine. Where is that? Where are those flags, right? And the war is still going on, but you don't hear much about us standing with Ukraine because, the reality of the situation is that there's no way to win against Russia in this situation. Very low odds, as they knew from the very beginning. They knew from the very beginning that the odds were incredibly low, but they were willing to sacrifice the Ukrainians to the last Ukrainian. And they were willing to set up the set them up against artillery, for which we did not have artillery for them. So, the Russians are just mass producing artillery. This is an artillery war, drone war. They're doing combined arms attacks and all this, and they have really good practice. This is a government government industry that's churning out for the military, that's churning out weapons they need at a reasonable cost, as opposed to unreasonable weapons at unreasonable costs, which is what our military is largely supplied with, or in a big part supplied with. Not to be offensive, but it's a for-profit industry in the U.S. And it's like they'll make it's the incentive for the arms manufacturers to just keep jacking up the price, and then give it to the government. It's the best thing the government can get. It may not be that good, and then so it's like there's this tendency to not want to create the system that's actually needed to win the war. So basically, America starts wars. It doesn't have the weapons it needs to win the wars. But the point is not always to win the wars. It's just to run some laps, burn up some fuel, destroy people's countries. It seems really cold. It's and absent. It's cold and absent. Why? Because it's putting money into the arms industry, for how I explained it earlier. So what's really needed is that revamping into the space industrial complex. Everybody keeps their jobs, except they're getting paid more, and more money is going into the space industrial complex than the military industrial complex, and it's just generating tons of returns. And America's still safe because it's got oceans and hypersonic missiles that can reach anywhere in the world. So who needs to be making what for what war? And we really have to get together as a people and think these things out. Guys, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you on another episode of Geopolitics with Mark.